The last choice on the bridge, a human's decision that changed two worlds. The ash fell in sheets that day, a silent snow drifting from a sky that had forgotten color. It coated the long road that cut through the charred plains, sticking to the boots of the human soldiers who trudged ahead of their armored convoy, and to the smooth, jointed armor of the alien escorts who walked beside them. The war had burned everything here, the villages, the crops, even the air. All that was left was this thin gray rain and the uneasy alliance between two peoples who had been trying to kill each other less than a year ago. Ethan Hale walked at the front of the lead truck, rifle slung across his chest, visor down against the ash. The convoy was carrying something important, too important to trust to a single army. The official report called it a joint security transfer. The soldiers in both camps called it a powder keg. Somewhere in the sealed container, riding in the middle vehicle, was a shard, a crystal no larger than a man's fist but powerful enough to shift the balance of war. Both sides claimed it belonged to them. Neither side wanted to move it without the other's guns watching. The alien escorts, Arvenians, moved with a grace Ethan had never managed in armor. Their eyes, set slightly wider than a human's, gleamed silver in the dim light. Their helmets were open-faced, exposing skin that shimmered faintly in the ashfall. He tried not to stare. The truce was thin as glass and about as likely to shatter. He didn't need anyone thinking he was too interested in the people on the other side. Still, his gaze kept drifting forward to the Arvanian officer near the front of their column. She was tall for her kind, her pale skin carrying a faint iridescence, like frost under moonlight. The scar along her jaw said she had seen as much battle as any human here. Her name, he'd been told, was Lura. No rank, no title. Just Lura. The road ahead wound through the remnants of what had once been a forest, though now the trees stood black and skeletal, their branches heavy with ash. Somewhere beyond that, the vale began, a stretch of deep ravines and hollowed trees that had been a natural border even before the war. Intelligence reports said raiders still hid there, preying on whatever crossed. Human deserters, alien separatists, things no one had ever claimed. The first sign of trouble came as a sound, faint, almost lost in the crunch of boots on ash. Ethan lifted a hand and the convoy slowed. Somewhere ahead, a hollow thump echoed through the trees. Laura stopped as well, tilting her head, silver eyes narrowing. "Not wind," she said, her voice low but carrying. A moment later, the first explosion tore through the road. The lead vehicle pitched sideways, armor smoking, and ash billowed upward in a black-gray cloud. Shouts erupted in both languages, orders and warnings overlapping. Ethan hit the dirt, scanning the ridgeline. Figures moved there, thin, fast, wrapped in the same gray as the ash. Gunfire cracked through the air. The convoy's rear vehicles tried to reverse, but more blasts forced them to a halt. The attackers weren't aiming to kill everyone. They were cutting the convoy in half, isolating the center truck. "The shard," Ethan muttered, already pushing to his feet. Elara was moving too, her long blade flashing into her hand with a speed that made him blink. "They cannot take it." He didn't know if she meant couldn't or mustn't, but there was no time to ask. They broke toward the center vehicle from opposite sides. Bullets and plasma fire ripped through the ash-laden air, sizzling as they passed. One of the alien escorts fell, her armor sparking. A human sergeant dragged her behind the truck, shouting for medics who weren't there. Two of the attackers had already reached the container, working at the magnetic locks with practiced efficiency. Ethan dropped one with a burst of fire. The second spun toward him, eyes glowing faintly behind his mask. Not human, not Arvenian. Something else. The raiders weren't just deserters. Illawarra took the second one down before Ethan could fire again, her blade sliding between the plates of his armor with surgical precision. She wrenched it free, ash mixing with the dark blood that sprayed across the container's side. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, both breathing hard, the shard's container between them like a live thing. More attackers were coming. Too many. The rear half of the convoy was burning, and the front half was cut off. Someone was shouting for a retreat, but retreat meant leaving the shard behind, or letting it fall into hands that would use it to restart the war. "Move it!" Ethan barked, grabbing the container's handle. It was heavier than it looked, and it vibrated faintly in his grip. Lara fell in beside him without a word, covering his flank as they broke from the road and into the skeletal forest. Ash closed around them, swallowing the shouts and gunfire until it was just the crunch of their boots and the distant hum of whatever power the shard carried. They didn't stop until the road was out of sight. Ethan leaned against a charred trunk, chest heaving. "We have to circle back, link with what's left of the convoy." Lara's eyes stayed on the trees. "If we go back now, we die. And they take it anyway." He didn't want to agree, but the truth sat heavy in his gut. The attackers had known exactly where to hit. This wasn't a random strike. "Then where?" She hesitated as if weighing whether to tell him. Finally, she nodded toward the deeper shadows ahead. "Kestrel Vale. There are places they cannot follow." Ethan knew the stories. The Vale was more than dangerous terrain. It was where the oldest battles had been fought, where the ground still whispered to those who walked it. No human patrols went there, unless they had no other choice. He glanced down at the container in his hands, then at her. "Lead the way." They moved deeper into the forest, the ash falling thicker now, turning the world to shades of gray and white. Every so often, Ethan thought he heard something. A faint ringing, like crystal under pressure. He realized after a while that it was coming from the container. The shard inside wasn't just humming, it was calling. Hours later, when they stopped to rest in the shelter of a hollow tree, Lara watched him in silence as he set the container between them. "You feel it," she said finally. Not a question. He nodded slowly. "What is it?" Her gaze flicked to the shard, then back to him. "A bridge," she said, "between your world and mine. Between more than that. If it is broken, there is no crossing again." Ethan didn't know what to make of that. "And if it's kept?" She looked away, her voice barely above the ash-soft wind. "Then someone has to guard it. Forever." They sat there, the ash piling on the roots around them, the distant shouts of the attackers gone now, replaced by the eerie stillness of the Vale's edge. Somewhere ahead lay whatever places they cannot follow, she spoke of. Somewhere ahead the shard's whisper would grow louder. And somewhere ahead, Ethan suspected, was the reason she hadn't let it out of her sight for the entire convoy. The further they went, the more the ash stopped looking like the remains of burned villages and started to feel like something older, something that had been here long before the war. The air was colder now, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Ethan's tongue feel heavy. The forest thinned and reformed in strange ways, wide gaps suddenly giving way to thick walls of pale, towering trunks. And the trunks themselves, they were wrong. They were hollow, not rotted-out dead wood, but living pillars, wide enough for a man to walk inside and keep walking. Each had an opening near its base, a dark oval leading into shadows that swallowed even the ashen light. Lara moved with more caution now, her silver eyes flicking from one opening to the next as if expecting something to emerge. "This place doesn't look like any forest I've seen," Ethan murmured, adjusting the weight of the shard's container on his shoulder. "That's because it isn't," Lara said quietly. "The Vale was grown, not planted." He glanced at her. "By who?" Her expression didn't change. "By what?" They skirted the edge of a massive trunk, whose opening was tall enough to fit two men standing on each other's shoulders. Inside, the darkness seemed to pulse faintly. Ethan thought he heard a low hum, but it might have been the shard in his pack. He kept walking. The ash muffled their footsteps, but every sound seemed sharper here. The rustle of Lara's armor plates, the faint click of his rifle sling, even the sound of his breathing. Once a gust of wind passed through the trunks, and the opening sang. Not a whistle, not a moan. Something closer to a voice, stretched thin. "You said there are places they can't follow," Ethan said after a while. "You mean because of the terrain?" "I mean because they won't," she replied. "The hollow trees, remember." That wasn't the kind of answer that made him feel better. "Remember what?" Her gaze flicked to him. "Who belongs here, and who doesn't?" They pressed on for another mile, following a narrow path that wound between the trunks in uneven spirals. The deeper they went, the less ash fell. Instead, tiny pale leaves drifted down from somewhere far above, like slow snow. Ethan noticed they didn't crumble when they touched the ground. Instead, they seemed to sink into it, vanishing without trace. At one point, Laura raised a hand for him to stop. She tilted her head toward a trunk about 30 paces away. Ethan squinted and saw movement inside the hollow. Not a shape exactly, but a ripple, like heat distortion. Then slowly something emerged. It was tall, jointed, and utterly silent, its surface a pale gray that matched the trees. Its head, if that was what the bulbous upper section was, tilted toward them, and Ethan felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. It didn't advance, didn't attack. It just watched. Elra made a small gesture with her fingers. Not quite a salute, not quite a warning sign. The figure tilted its head the other way, then stepped backward into the hollow. The darkness swallowed it, and the opening looked empty again. "What the hell was that?" Ethan hissed. "A warden," she said simply. "It let us pass." He decided not to ask what happened when a warden didn't let you pass. They walked until the trunks thinned again, and the path widened into a natural clearing. In the center stood a single hollow tree, larger than any Ethan had seen yet, its base easily the size of a small building. Around it, the ground was bare, the ash swept away as if by an unseen hand. The opening at its base glowed faintly from within, pale light pulsing in time with the shard in Ethan's pack. Laura stopped at the edge of the clearing. "We rest here." Ethan set the container down, flexing his shoulders. The glow from the tree made his skin prickle. "Is this safe?" "As safe as anywhere in the Vale," she said. "The wardens don't cross this circle." That didn't mean much to him, but he was too tired to argue. He crouched by the container, checking the locks again. The vibration had grown stronger, and now the faint hum was joined by something else. A pattern, almost like a heartbeat. "You feel it more here," Laura said quietly. She was kneeling on the other side of the container, her gaze fixed on the glowing hollow. "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "It's like it knows we're here." "It does," she said. He stared at her. "Laura, what exactly is this thing? Because I've heard a dozen different stories since we got the order to guard it, and none of them make sense." Her eyes met his, silver catching the glow. "It is a shard of the bridge. Once it connected our worlds, not just through space, but through what lies between. Trade, knowledge, peace, and war when it broke." Ethan tried to picture it. A bridge between planets, between peoples. If this is just a piece, what happens if someone puts it back together? Her voice was very soft. Then someone decides which worlds touch, and which ones don't. They sat in silence for a long moment. The hollow tree's glow painted her features in strange light, making her look both alien and familiar. He realized he was staring and looked away. A sound broke the stillness. Faint, almost like a footstep. Ethan's hand went to his rifle. Alara was already on her feet, blade in hand, eyes scanning the edge of the clearing. The figure that stepped into the light was human, barely. His armor was mismatched, scavenged from both armies, and his face was marked with ash tattoos and jagged lines. He grinned, showing teeth blackened at the edges. "Didn't expect to find a welcoming committee," he said in accented common, "but I'll take the shard now." 3 more shapes moved behind him, 1 human, 2 Arvanian, all with the same patchwork armor, all with weapons up. Raiders who'd learned to work together in the worst way, against everyone else. Ethan and Laura moved without speaking, falling into a back-to-back stance that had become instinct over the last day. The lead raider chuckled. "You think you can hold it? In the Vale? Against us?" "No," Laura said calmly. "We think the Vale will." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the glow from the hollow tree flared. From its opening stepped 3 wardens, their movements slow but unstoppable, each one towering over the raiders. The lead man's grin faltered. "Fall back!" someone shouted, but it was too late. The wardens moved with terrifying silence, herding the intruders toward the trees. No one fired. Maybe because they knew it wouldn't help. Maybe because the air itself seemed to hold its breath. In moments, the raiders were gone, swallowed by the hollows. The clearing was still again. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Remind me never to piss off the trees." Laura sheathed her blade. "They are not the trees. They are what is left of the ones who built them." That was not a comforting thought. They rested in the clearing that night, the glow of the hollow tree casting strange patterns over the ash. Ethan took first watch, listening to the distant hollow voices that rose and fell through the trunks. They didn't sound hostile, just aware. When Lara relieved him, she sat beside the shard's container without opening it, as if the glow alone was enough to speak to her. "We'll move at first light," she said. "Deeper in. There is a place where the bridge's voice can't be heard by those who would misuse it." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed such a place existed. But for now, with the wardens watching from the hollows and the strange glow on her face, he felt, if not safe, then at least like they weren't entirely alone. And in the Vale, that was enough. The first rain in Kestrel Vale did not fall like Earth's. It shimmered, descending in twisting strands that refracted light into pale blue halos. Each droplet clung to the air, as if reluctant to let go, breaking apart only when a gust cut through the forest. Ethan sat under a canopy of skeletal branches, their bark pocked with scars and riddled with small dark holes. Elra sat opposite him, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap. The fire between them was no more than a clutch of glowing embers, the smoke curling up and vanishing among the hollow limbs above. She'd been quiet since they left the outpost ruins at first light, and Ethan hadn't pressed her. Not yet. He knew that when she did speak, it would matter. When it came, her voice was low, almost lost in the hiss of the rain. "These trees," she said, "are older than either of our species' histories. They were here before the first Arvanian vessel landed on this moon. They listen." He tilted his head, watching her carefully. "Listen?" "Yes," she replied, running a pale finger along one of the holes in the bark beside her. "The sound travels through the hollows. That's how they speak to each other. It's how they warn the others when something is coming." Ethan followed her gaze upward, scanning the black knots in the branches. "What are they warning about now?" Laura's eyes didn't waver from his. "Us." They moved again before the second hour of light, skirting the twisted root systems and avoiding the deeper gullies where rainwater collected into pools that steamed faintly. Ethan kept one hand near the grip of his rifle, the other brushing aside low-hanging strands of moss that dripped like the strings of an unstrung harp. Every so often, he caught Laura glancing at the trees as if trying to read their silent language. Her steps were light, precise, nothing like the panicked pace of the first day they'd fled together. That first escape had been desperation. This was calculated movement. They were being hunted. When the attack came, it was so quiet that only the shift in Elra's posture warned him. Her ears, hidden beneath the loose fall of her hair, twitched slightly, and she pivoted to the left without a word. A breath later, a sharpened shard of chitin sliced through the air where she'd been standing. Ethan swung the rifle up, firing into the canopy. The recoil thudded into his shoulder, and a shadow dropped from the branches, landing with a wet crunch in the mud. It was no soldier, at least not in the way Ethan understood soldiers. The creature's skin was stretched over bone like sun-cracked leather, its limbs jointed in the wrong places, the eyes a cluster of black pits. Laura didn't flinch. "Hollowborn," she said. "Scavengers. And spies." By the time they reached the ridgeline, Ethan had killed 3 more, and Laura had dispatched 2 with a thin, curved blade that seemed more an extension of her arm than a weapon. They took shelter beneath an outcropping of stone, watching the Vale stretch below them. From this vantage, Ethan could see the way the forest itself shifted with the wind, each hollow tree bending almost imperceptibly, the soundless ripple moving through them like a murmur. It was unnerving. "They're not just reacting to the weather," he said quietly. Laura nodded. "They're passing news. And now every tree in Kestrel Vale knows we're here." Night fell faster here than it should have. The sky went from gray to black in the span of 10 breaths, and the air cooled sharply. Ethan built no fire. Instead, they sat in the dark, knees nearly touching. He could feel the heat radiating from her in the cold, and in the absence of words, he found his thoughts drifting. Not to the war, not to the mission, but to the way her eyes, even in shadow, seemed to find him without searching. She spoke first this time. "There's a route through the hollow maze, dangerous, but faster. The other option is the low pass, and the low pass will be waiting for us." Ethan met her gaze. "Then we take the maze." The hollow maze was less a place and more a sensation. The ground dipped and rose in uneven ridges, the trees here taller and more tightly packed. The air smelled faintly of something metallic. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as though the forest had become a cathedral of wood and stone. Alara paused often, pressing her palm to the trunk of a tree, tilting her head as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Ethan stayed alert, tracking movement in the periphery, small flickers of shadow that melted into the dark whenever he turned toward them. They weren't alone. Halfway through, the air changed. The metallic tang grew sharper, tinged with the scent of ozone. Ethan felt the hairs on his arms rise. "Storm," he murmured. Laura's hand tightened on his forearm. "Not weather." The first strike came from above, a streak of pale light that punched into the ground with enough force to throw him off his feet. His ears rang, vision swimming, but through the haze he saw Laura standing, her blade catching the faint glow from the impact. Figures emerged from the dark, 6, maybe 7, humanoid but too tall, their armor grown rather than forged. Arvenian hunters. The fight was close and brutal. In the confined space of the maze, gunfire was deafening, muzzle flashes turning the trunks into strobe-lit pillars. Lara moved like water, her strikes flowing from one to the next, never in the same rhythm twice. Ethan backed her, covering angles, forcing their attackers into her reach. One of the hunters caught him with a backhand that rattled his teeth, but before the follow-up came, Lara was there, a blur of motion, cutting the hunter down. When it was over, only the hiss of the rain on steaming armor remained. They didn't speak for a long time after that. Blood, both human and Arvenian, mixed in the puddles at their feet. Ethan could feel the tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the aftermath, the sudden stillness after the storm. Laura's breathing was steady, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly hidden. He didn't press. They moved on. By dawn, the maze opened into a clearing. In the center stood a single massive tree, its trunk wider than any ship's hull Ethan had served on. Its bark was pale and smooth, and unlike the others, it bore no hollows. Laura stopped at the edge of the clearing, her voice almost reverent. "The heart tree!" Ethan looked from her to the trunk. "Significance?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her tone was different, quieter, as if speaking to herself. "If the hollow trees are the ears of Kestrel Vale, this is the memory." She approached slowly, placing her hand against the smooth bark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around them shifted, and Ethan heard it, a faint, layered whisper, thousands of voices speaking all at once, too fast to understand. Laura's eyes closed and her breathing slowed. They remember everyone who's passed through here, every death, every promise. When she opened her eyes, they locked on his. "We don't have much time." The hunters weren't acting alone. "My father's reach is here already." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we move faster." But before they could, the whispers in the heart tree changed, louder, urgent. And in the rush of alien voices, Ethan thought he heard his own name. The sound was impossible yet undeniable. Ethan had heard his name shouted across battlefields, whispered in back alley deals, even cursed by enemies who barely knew English. But never like this, woven into 1,000 overlapping voices, carried through the living wood of a tree older than human history. It wasn't just his name, it was the weight behind it, the way the syllables bent in an accent no human mouth could form. Beside him, Laura's hand pressed harder against the heart tree, her jaw tight, eyes narrowing as though straining to hear something that might slip away if she blinked. "They know you," she said quietly, almost accusing. Ethan swallowed. "Not possible. I've never been here. Never." "They know what you've done," Laura cut in, turning to face him fully. "And they know what you will do." He almost laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You telling me this forest can see the future?" "I'm telling you the heart tree remembers more than the past," she replied, her voice low but steady. "It carries echoes, shadows of what could be. Some call them prophecies. Some call them warnings." Ethan glanced around the clearing. The other trees surrounding the heart tree swayed imperceptibly, as if a breeze had passed through only them. There was no wind. The air was heavy, still, tasting faintly of iron. His instinct screamed to move, to break contact with this place. But Liara's expression had changed. Gone was the guarded calculation she wore around strangers and allies alike. This was raw, unshielded. "What did it say?" he asked finally. Lara hesitated, her eyes flicking to the tree and back. That your presence here will break the balance. That if you keep moving toward the capital, two paths will open. One leads to a bridge between our peoples. The other, she didn't finish. The other what? Her silence told him enough. They left the clearing without speaking, though the whisper of the heart tree seemed to follow them, fading only when the forest thickened again. Laura's pace was faster now, her eyes scanning the canopy not just for movement, but for something deeper. Patterns, alignments, signals Ethan couldn't read. He stayed close, rifle ready, trying to shake the feeling that the forest itself was watching him. By midday the rain had stopped, replaced by a thin, misting fog that clung low to the ground. The hollow maze had given way to a gentler slope, though the gnarled roots still jutted like skeletal fingers through the soil. Ethan spotted tracks, boot prints, deliberate, heading in the same direction. He crouched to study them. 2, maybe 3 ahead of us, he murmured. Hours old. Laura knelt beside him, her gaze sharp. Hunters wouldn't leave tracks unless they wanted to. A lure, or a warning, they followed anyway. The trail led them to a narrow gorge where the mist pooled thick enough to obscure the far side. A single fallen trunk bridged the gap, its bark stripped, surface slick. Ethan didn't like it. Too exposed, he muttered. Laura's ears flicked, catching something he didn't hear. They're already here. The first shot came from somewhere in the mist, a flash of green light that seared past Ethan's shoulder. He dove, rolling into cover behind a cluster of roots. Laura was already moving, vanishing into the fog like she'd been born in it. Gunfire cracked, echoing strangely in the gorge. Ethan returned fire, aiming for the source of each muzzle flash, but the mist turned sound into a trickster. Then he heard it, Elra's voice sharp and urgent. Behind you! He spun just in time to see a hunter break from the mist, armor glinting. The alien's blade arced downward, but Ethan caught the wrist, driving his own knife between the plates of its chest armor. It crumpled silently, but more shapes were moving in now, drawn by the noise. Laura reappeared, sliding down the gorge wall with the grace of something untouchable. Her blade dripped green light, her breathing even. They're probing, she said, not trying to kill us. Yet. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. Then we make them regret holding back. They pushed forward together, crossing the trunk bridge in a blur of movement. Ethan's boots slipped once, but Laura's hand shot out, steadying him without breaking stride. On the far side, the ground rose sharply, leading into a stand of trees whose hollows were larger, darker, almost like open mouths. The sound here was different, deeper, resonating in Ethan's bones. This is close to the vale's edge, Laura said. Beyond this, the land opens. No cover. Good for them, Ethan replied grimly. Bad for us. They moved anyway. The edge of the vale came suddenly, the trees ending as if cut by a blade. Beyond was a sweep of grassland under a dim sky, the distant outline of a ridge marking their next waypoint. But they didn't get that far. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until the ground itself seemed to vibrate. Ethan turned, scanning the tree line, and saw them. Not hunters. Not hollowborn. Machines. Tall, spindly constructs with insect-like limbs, their heads crowned with sensor arrays that rotated in perfect synchronization. Drones, but heavier, built for pursuit. Their bodies gleamed with the black and silver markings of the Arvenian vanguard. They're not supposed to be here, Laura whispered, her voice edged with something Ethan hadn't heard before. Fear. Then either your father broke his own treaty, Ethan said, chambering a fresh round, or someone wants it to look like he did. The machines advanced, legs slicing through the grass without a sound. Ethan fired first, dropping the lead drone with a burst to its central node, but the others didn't slow. Elara's blade could shear through their limbs, but every strike left her more exposed. They fought back to back, the air thick with the whine of servos and the sharp crack of gunfire. When the last drone fell, its body collapsing into a heap of smoking joints, Ethan was breathing hard, sweat running down his spine despite the chill. Elara wiped her blade clean, but her eyes were distant. That was no patrol, she said. That was a test. Of what? Of us. Together. Ethan stared at her for a moment, the words settling between them like an unspoken truth. Then from the distant ridge, a flare arced into the sky. a spiral of red and white fire. Elara's head snapped up. "That's a summons," she said. "From the capital." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And if we ignore it, they'll come to us, in greater numbers." He slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Then we choose where the fight happens." They didn't speak again until the ridge loomed above them. The climb was steep, the air thinning, but when they reached the crest, Ethan understood why the flare had come from here. Below lay a valley unlike any they'd crossed, wide open and lined with structures of pale stone. Some were whole, others shattered, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to shift when he looked too long. Laura stood beside him, her voice quiet. "This is where the old alliances were made and broken." Ethan scanned the valley. "And where they want to end us." From the far side, figures began to emerge. Arvenian, human, and others Ethan didn't recognize. Not soldiers, not entirely. And in the center of them, tall and robed in deep crimson, was a figure whose presence pressed against the air like gravity itself. Liara's breath caught. "My father." Ethan's hand went instinctively to his rifle. The heart tree's voices echoed in his memory, and for the first time since they'd entered Kestrel Vale, Ethan wasn't sure if he was walking toward survival or the path Lara had refused to name. The robed figure descended the slope with a deliberate slowness, each step placed as though the ground itself acknowledged his right to walk upon it. His robes, deep crimson that caught the dim light in shifting shades, dragged lightly through the grass, leaving a trail that the others avoided stepping into. He carried no weapon, yet the air around him felt heavier than any battlefield Ethan had known. Beside him, Laura was no longer the precise, controlled presence Ethan had come to rely on in the forest. Her stance shifted between instinctive caution and something more personal, an almost imperceptible tightening in her shoulders, the way her hands curled and uncurled at her sides. She didn't speak his name, but Ethan could hear it in the silence between her breaths. The group halted 20 paces away. The robed man, no, not just a man, an Arvenian whose bearing seemed carved from centuries of command, lifted his chin and regarded Ethan as if evaluating the worth of a tool. Then his gaze moved to Lara, and for the first time there was a flicker of something, not warmth, but recognition. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying in the open valley without force, yet reaching every ear. Lara's reply was quiet, but her words cut. "You shouldn't be here." "Nor should you," he countered, as if they were discussing a minor breach of etiquette rather than a life-and-death chase across hostile territory. His eyes shifted back to Ethan. "This is the human who carries your shadow?" Ethan felt the weight of that phrase, though he didn't understand it. "I carry my own," he said evenly. The Arvenian's lips curved, not quite a smile. "Bold, predictable." Elara stepped forward, closing some of the distance. "If you've come to take me back, you've wasted your journey. The capital is not my home. It never was." "Home," her father repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "You speak of it as if it is a place that chooses you, rather than one you owe." Ethan kept his eyes on the robed figure, measuring him. "If this is a family matter, we can walk away." "No," Laura said sharply, surprising him. "If we walk away, we walk into a trap. This meeting was never about my return. It's about you." The robed man's gaze sharpened. "She sees more clearly than you do, human. The accord is breaking. There are forces, both in my halls and in your fleets, that want open conflict again. But war is expensive, in blood, in memory. The right catalyst could shape the terms before it begins." Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. "And I'm supposed to be that catalyst?" "You already are," the Arvanian said simply. "The heart tree remembers you. I hear its whispers through my own channels. You've been marked, not by me, not by her, but by the veil itself. That makes you valuable, or dangerous." Lara's voice was colder now. "You want to use him." "Want?" Her father's eyes were steady. "Need. There is a summit in 3 days' time. Representatives from both worlds will be there. If you arrive at my side alive, you become proof that even the veil could not swallow an alliance whole. If you arrive dead," his pause was deliberate, heavy, "then you become proof that nothing survives crossing into the other's domain." Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "So either I'm your trophy or your warning." Exactly, the Arvanian said. And which one? Will depend on whether you walk with me willingly. The silence stretched. Around them, the others shifted slightly. Arvanian guards in bioforged armor, human envoys whose eyes darted between the two species leaders, and a handful of figures Ethan couldn't place at all. Lara took a step closer to Ethan, her voice pitched low. If you go with him, you'll be walking into a nest where every blade will be pointed at your back. If you don't, they'll come for us in numbers we can't outrun. Ethan thought of the heart tree's voices, the two paths it had promised, one leading to a bridge, the other to something Lara hadn't dared name. He thought of the Hollowborn, the hunters, the machines in the grass. And he thought of Lara, how her hand had steadied him on the trunk bridge, how she'd fought without hesitation at his side. He turned back to her father. 3 days, you said. Yes, I'll walk with you, but not at your side. Not yet. A flicker of interest crossed the Arvanian's features. Negotiating your position. That is, wise. Ilare's father gestured, and the group parted to create a path. Then let us see if your wisdom survives the road to the summit. They moved as a caravan, the valley giving way to a winding pass between stone cliffs. Guards kept their distance from Ethan, though he could feel their eyes on him. Lara walked beside him, silent for the first hour, until the cliffs opened into a plateau where strange, angular structures stood like frozen waves. This place, she said softly, was once neutral ground, before the First War. Ethan studied the stone, pale, etched with those same shifting symbols from the valley ruins. And now? Now it's a place where everyone pretends to remember peace. The camp they made was efficient, almost ceremonial. No fires. Arvanians used heat stones instead, glowing faintly blue. No loud talk, no laughter. The only sound was the wind sliding over the plateau. That night, Ethan lay awake, the alien constellations overhead unfamiliar, sharp-edged. He could feel the summit looming, each hour pulling him closer to whatever game Laura's father was playing. But more than that, he could feel Laura's presence just beyond the edge of his vision, her watchfulness, her measured breaths. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the echo of the heart tree still spoke his name. The city revealed itself only after the caravan crested the last rise before dawn. Ethan had expected walls, fortifications, towers, some kind of obvious defense. But Corsa, capital of the Arvanian domain, unfolded like a flower instead. Layer upon layer of pale stone terraces descended toward a central plaza, all arranged in a perfect circle. Bridges arched between towers of glass-veined crystal, catching the first light of the rising moons and scattering it into 1,000 glimmers. It was beautiful in a way that made Ethan uneasy. Beauty, he had learned, was often the first layer of a snare. The caravan slowed as they entered a broad avenue lined with tall, silver-leaved trees. Arvanians in flowing garments moved aside for them, their eyes following Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and something sharper. Calculation, perhaps. He kept his posture loose, his rifle slung casually over one shoulder, but his gaze missed nothing. The guards here were fewer, but they carried themselves like predators who didn't need to show their teeth until it was too late. Lara walked beside him, her expression unreadable, but her ears twitched once. A subtle signal he'd learned meant she was listening to more than just the surface noise of the crowd. "They're already talking about you," she murmured without moving her lips. "What are they saying?" Ethan asked under his breath. "That you survived the veil, that you walk beside me, and that my father must have a purpose for you worth the risk." Her eyes flicked briefly to the largest tower at the plaza's center. "That's where the summit will be held, the Hall of Accord." From here, the tower looked less like a building and more like a spear of crystal driven into the earth. Sunlight poured through it, casting fractured rainbows across the plaza. But beneath that light was movement, envoys arriving from every corner of two worlds. Some came in sleek airships, others on creatures with wings of living metal, their feathers whispering against the wind. By the time they reached the hall, the plaza was thick with delegates. Humans in tailored uniforms mingled with Arvanians draped in ceremonial cloths, and a dozen other species Ethan couldn't name. All of them turned as the caravan approached, and Ethan could feel the shift in the air, the weight of 100 conversations pausing mid-breath. Ulra's father stepped forward, his crimson robes sweeping the ground as he addressed the crowd in a voice that carried without strain. Today we gather not to remember the wars behind us, but to decide whether there will be wars ahead. We bring with us proof that even the deepest wounds may be crossed. He turned, gesturing to Laura and Ethan. The murmurs rippled outward like shockwaves. Ethan kept his jaw set, refusing to look like anyone's trophy. The Hall of Accord was colder inside, the crystal walls refracting light into shifting patterns that played across the polished stone floor. A long table dominated the center, its surface etched with the map of the two moons, our Venus and Syndrel, separated by the dark ribbon of the veil. They were seated at one end, with Elara's father at the head. Directly across from them sat Admiral Rains, a human whose record Ethan knew too well. Brilliant tactician, ruthless when cornered, the kind of man who considered alliances tools to be sharpened and discarded as needed. His eyes locked on Ethan the moment he sat. "So," Rains said, his voice carrying just enough for the other delegates to hear, "this is the one who walked through Kestrel Vale and came out breathing." "Breathing, shooting, and not particularly impressed," Ethan replied evenly. A few delegates hid smiles. Others leaned forward, sensing the edges of something more than diplomacy. Elara's father began with formalities, each delegate offering opening words, pledges of peace wrapped around veiled threats. Ethan listened, watching for the currents beneath the surface. This was no summit of equals. This was a chessboard, and every piece was already in motion. It wasn't until the second hour that he felt it, a vibration, faint but steady, through the crystal floor beneath his boots. He shifted, thinking it was some distant machinery, but then the voice came, soft, layered, threading through the air like it had in the heart tree's clearing. "Ethan." He froze, eyes darting to Laura. She was staring at him, ears tilting forward, and he knew she heard it too. The warning came in fragments, words that weren't words, a sense more than a sentence. Bridge. Fracture. The choice is here. And then, like a shadow falling across the mind, another presence pressed in. A second voice, harsher, colder. This one spoke without pretense. "Kill her now, and the war will end before it begins." Ethan's pulse spiked. His eyes swept the room, but no one else reacted. The delegates continued their slow exchange of promises and poison. Laura's hand found his under the table, a subtle squeeze. "You heard it too," she whispered. "Two voices," he murmured. Her gaze sharpened. "The heart tree isn't alone in speaking here. This hall is built on old ground, older than either of our peoples." Before he could answer, Admiral Rains' voice cut through the air. "If this so-called alliance is to mean anything, then the human who survived the veil should speak for his kind. Tell us, Captain Shaw, should we trust the Arvenians?" The room's attention slammed onto him. Elara's father's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Ethan stood slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Trust isn't the point," he said. "The point is whether we can survive what's coming if we don't work together. I've seen what waits in the veil, and I've seen machines on the wrong side of the treaty line. Someone is already moving the pieces toward war. Maybe it's one of you in this room. Maybe it's someone we haven't named yet. But if you think your borders or your old grudges will protect you," he let the silence stretch, "you're already dead." The words landed hard. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at him with new interest. Elara's father rose. "Then let us agree that the first order of this summit is to find the hand that moves those pieces." But even as the discussion shifted, Ethan could feel the two voices lingering at the edge of his thoughts, one urging unity, the other whispering for blood. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him that before the summit ended, he would have to choose which to listen to. The summit stretched into its second day under the twin moon's cold light. The Hall of Accord did not sleep. Its crystal walls seemed to pulse faintly at night, as though the building itself kept watch over those within. Ethan had not slept much either. The voices had not left him. The first was softer now, but constant, threading through his dreams and waking thoughts. Build, bind, bridge. The second was a blade in the dark, whispering in precise syllables. Cut, break, end. The delegates were restless. The initial speeches and posturing were over. Now came the quieter, deadlier exchanges. Private side rooms, hushed conversations in corridors, coded gestures exchanged across the long table. Elara moved between groups with a grace that concealed her alertness, but Ethan saw the subtle shifts in her ears, the way her fingers brushed the edge of her belt whenever she passed certain delegates. By midday, the hall's temperature seemed to drop, though no one acknowledged it. Ethan was speaking with a Syndralan engineer about the unusual machinery he'd seen near Kestrel Vale when the air changed again. A prickling sensation at the base of his skull. He turned and found himself looking at a figure he hadn't seen before. The man, if man was the right word, was tall and angular, his skin the color of burnished bronze, his eyes pale and reflective like still water. He wore no delegation's colors, only a long coat that seemed to drink in the light. "You carry two voices," the stranger said without preamble. Ethan's throat went dry. "And you know what they are?" "I know what they are not," the stranger said. "They are not of your species, they are not of hers, and they are not in agreement." His gaze flicked toward Laura across the hall. "One will end her, the other will bind you to her until the end of your line." Ethan's instinct was to demand answers, but something in the stranger's expression told him that information here was as costly as blood. "Why tell me?" "Because," the stranger said, "the bridge cannot hold if it is built on ignorance." Then he was gone, swallowed by the currents of the summit crowd. That evening, Laura found Ethan on one of the outer balconies overlooking the plaza. The moons hung low, casting long shadows through the silver-leaved trees. "You've been quiet," she said. "Two voices in my head will do that," he said. She leaned on the balcony rail beside him, her eyes scanning the city. "The bridge and the fracture," she murmured. "That's how the Vale's seers used to speak of choices. The bridge joins two worlds. The fracture ends them both." Ethan glanced at her. "And which do you want?" She didn't answer right away. "What I want doesn't matter if the wrong choice keeps either of us alive, only long enough to watch everything else burn." Before he could respond, the balcony door opened, and one of Liara's father's aides stepped out. "The Chancellor requests your presence in the lower chambers. Both of you." The lower chambers were nothing like the crystalline grandeur above. Here the walls were stone, rough and unpolished, etched with deep grooves that glowed faintly. The air was cooler, heavier, and the sound of the summit faded to a distant hum. Lara's father was waiting beside a table carved from a single block of black stone. On it lay an object Ethan recognized instantly, the shard of metal he'd pulled from the machine in the Vale. Only now it pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. "This," the Chancellor said, "was not built by human hands, nor Arvenian. Its design matches nothing in our archives." Ethan stepped closer, feeling the faint vibration against his skin. "It's calling," he said before he realized he'd spoken aloud. The Chancellor's gaze sharpened. "To which voice?" "Both," Ethan said, and that terrified him more than anything else. Lara reached for the shard, but her father stopped her with a hand on her wrist. "Touch it, and it will choose you," he said. "Right now it has not decided. That uncertainty is the only reason you are still here." Ethan looked from father to daughter, the weight of the moment pressing down like the stone above them. The summit was still in motion above their heads, but here, in this chamber, he felt the true decisions being made. And somewhere in the shadows between the voices in his mind, he realized something else. The choice might not be his alone. The Chancellor's hand lingered on Laura's wrist just long enough to make the moment feel like a challenge. She didn't flinch, but Ethan could see the muscle in her jaw tense, the subtle shift of her weight that meant she was already calculating how to break his grip if she had to. The shard pulsed between them, its faint glow deepening with each passing second, as though aware it was the focus of every eye in the chamber. Ethan stepped closer, the vibration under his skin growing stronger. He could feel both voices stirring in his mind. The soft one like the rustle of leaves in the Vale, urging hold together, bind the wound, build the bridge, and the cold one like the ring of metal on stone, whispering, break her, cut free, end the war before it begins. The conflict made the back of his skull ache, like pressure building before a storm. "Why bring us down here?" Ethan asked finally. "If you're afraid of it choosing her, you could have kept this locked away." Loara's father studied him for a long moment. "Because human, the shard is not just a remnant, it is a seed, and seeds do not grow in darkness. If it chooses, it will awaken. I would rather that happen where I can control the ground it stands on. Lara's voice was quiet but sharp. You don't control the ground anymore. You barely control the hall above us. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. You speak like someone who forgets whose blood runs in her veins. Ethan stepped between them before the exchange could harden into something worse. If it's a seed, then what does it grow into? Neither answered immediately, and that silence told Ethan more than any explanation could. The shard pulsed again, brighter now, sending faint threads of light crawling across the black stone table. Ethan reached out, not touching it, but close enough that the warmth of it prickled against his fingertips. The voices surged, louder, clearer. Bind her to you, and she will hold the line. End her now, and the line will never be drawn. He pulled his hand back sharply, swallowing the taste of metal in his mouth. It's trying to force a choice, he said. Yes, the Chancellor said simply, and it is a choice that will echo beyond either of us. Before Ethan could reply, a distant sound broke through the heavy silence, shouting from above, the crash of something metallic against crystal. One of the Chancellor's aides burst into the chamber, his face pale, his robes torn. They've breached the hall, he gasped. Not just one faction, 3. Human, Arvanian, and... His voice faltered. Something else. The Chancellor's composure tightened like a fist. Get her out, he ordered, pointing to Loire. Ethan moved instantly, stepping between her and the guards who started forward. We're not splitting up. This is not your decision, the Chancellor said. It is if you want either of us to walk out of here alive, Ethan shot back. The sounds above grew louder. Weapons fire now, sharp and echoing, followed by the low, bone-deep hum of something Ethan had only heard once before. Veil-born machines. The realization sent a chill through him. The shard's glow intensified, spilling pale light across the chamber. The grooves in the walls lit up in answer, tracing ancient patterns that pulsed in time with the shard's rhythm. Ethan realized, with a sick twist of understanding, that the building itself was reacting to it. Loire's eyes locked on his. If it chooses now, in the middle of this, it's not going to wait for a better time, Ethan said. The door to the chamber shuddered under an impact, dust sifting down from the ceiling. The aides scrambled to brace it, but Ethan knew it wouldn't hold for long. The voices hit him at once, no longer in turns but together, clashing in his skull until he thought his vision might split in two. The soft one was urgent now, not just coaxing but commanding. Hold her hand. Bind her fate to yours. The cold one cut through it like a blade. Strike her down before they reach you. His heart pounded, the heat of the shard pulling him forward even as the chill of the second voice tried to root his feet in place. The world narrowed to the table, the glow, Laura's breath quickening beside him. Ethan, she said, and there was no command in her tone, no plea, just his name, solid and real in a way neither voice could imitate. He reached for the shard. The instant his skin touched it, light exploded outward, slamming into the walls and racing up through the hall above. He heard the sound of crystal singing, felt the air hum with a force that seemed to exist in more than one world at once. And then, silence except for his own ragged breathing. When the light faded, the shard was gone. In its place, a pattern burned into the stone. 2 arcs, crossing, neither broken. Laura's father stared at it, then at Ethan. It chose the bridge. Ethan's legs felt unsteady, but he managed a breath. Then let's make sure it holds. Above them, the fighting surged again. The choice had been made, but the cost of keeping it would be paid in the next breath. The boom that shook the chamber was not the sharp crack of weapons fire. It was deeper, heavier, the sound of something structural failing above. Dust rained down in a thin curtain, catching the last fading glow of the shard's mark on the table. The 2 arcs still burned faintly, not with heat, but with something Ethan could feel in his bones. A resonance, like the echo of a note that had no source. Laura's father stepped back from it, as if the mark might bite. You don't understand what you've done, he said, voice tight. Ethan didn't look at him. We can have that conversation when the building isn't coming down. The door burst inward with a final groan of metal. 2 Arvanian guards in ceremonial armor stumbled through, one bleeding heavily, the other barely upright. Behind them came figures Ethan didn't recognize. Lean, insectile shapes with chitin that shimmered in shifting colors. Their weapons were nothing like the rifles or swords of the summit. They were lengths of bone or crystal that seemed to grow as they moved, reshaping in their hands. The Chancellor's aides reacted instantly, drawing sidearms and forming a shield around him. Lara, however, moved the other way, toward Ethan, her hand finding his in one quick, certain motion. "Not your usual summit guess," Ethan muttered, pulling her behind the table as a bolt of pale light lanced across the room, vaporizing a chunk of stone. "They're from the Hollow Verge," Lura said, voice low. "My people's stories say they don't cross the veil unless something calls them." Ethan didn't need to guess what that something was. The shard might be gone, but the choice it had made, the bridge, was radiating out like a beacon, and not everyone answering it was coming to help. He dropped his rifle from his shoulder, checking the charge by feel as the first Verge warrior vaulted the wrecked doorway. The thing moved like it had too many joints, landing low and sliding forward in a blur. Ethan fired once, the blast catching it in the chest and hurling it backward into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. Two more replaced it instantly. The aides broke formation to return fire, but the Verge weapons were faster, their pale bolts slicing through the air like liquid light. One aide went down screaming, another simply vanished in a flash that left nothing but scorch marks. "Back corridor!" Ethan shouted to Lura, jerking his head toward the shadowed arch behind the table. Her father's voice cut through the chaos. "Take her. Keep her alive. Whatever happens, the bridge cannot break now." Ethan didn't have time to argue. The second wave was already pouring through. He dragged Lura into the corridor, the sound of the fight behind them fading into the pounding of their boots. The walls here were older than the rest of the hall, carved from rough stone and lined with more of those glowing grooves. The patterns twisted and branched, some looping back on themselves like rivers seen from above. Lara's breathing was steady despite the sprint. "This passage leads to the southern terraces. If we can reach them, we can disappear into the city. If they're here for the bridge, they're not going to stop at the hall," Ethan said. "They'll stop if the bridge isn't here to find," Lura replied. And there was something in her tone, not fear, but a weight, that made Ethan glance at her. "You think leaving the city will draw them off?" "I know it will." The corridor opened into a spiral stair that wound upward, the grooves on the walls flaring brighter as they climbed. Ethan felt the hum again, like the shard's pulse, but stretched thin, as if the building itself was urging them onward. They emerged into a wide terrace open to the night air. The city of Corsa spread below, silver trees swaying in a wind that smelled faintly of rain. But the beauty was marred by fire. Plumes of smoke rising from the plaza, the glow of burning crystal casting the crowd in shifting orange light. Airships hovered above, some marked with human fleet insignia, others bearing Arvenian crests. And between them, like dark stains on the sky, were craft Ethan had never seen before. Jagged, asymmetrical, moving with a disjointed grace that made his skin crawl. "They've already spread into the streets," Lura said, "which means we're running out of exits." A crack split the air, and part of the terrace wall erupted in shards of stone. Ethan shoved Lura down behind the railing, returning fire toward the source. A Verge warrior clinging to the side of a building opposite, its limbs stabbing into the stone for purchase like a spider. More were coming. He could see them now, flowing along the walls, their weapons shifting shape as they moved. Long spears collapsing into bows, bows folding into blades. "Southgate?" Ethan asked. Laura's ears twitched in a signal he'd learned meant two routes, neither safe. Southgate or through the sky bridges. The bridges are faster, but exposed. "Then we make them exposed to us, not the other way around," Ethan said, already moving toward the bridge entrance at the terrace's edge. The sky bridges arched high over the streets, their crystal paths glowing faintly from within. From up here, Ethan could see the entire plaza. The Hall of Accord's front steps crawling with fighters from three factions, none of them bothering to distinguish friend from foe anymore. It was chaos given form, and somewhere in that chaos, he knew, the bridge's choice was pulling strings they couldn't yet see. They ran. Verge bolts sliced the air around them, shattering the crystal underfoot in bursts of light. Ethan kept his body between Lara and the fire, returning shots when he could, but their pursuers were faster than human eyes could easily track. Halfway across, the bridge shuddered, not from weapons fire, but from something deeper. A low, resonant hum rolled up through Ethan's boots, and the crystal beneath them brightened until it was painful to look at. Lara stumbled, clutching her head. The voices, both of them. Ethan heard them too, overlapping in his skull, the soft one and the cold one, no longer separate but fused into a single, impossible chord. The bridge stands, the fracture waits. Choose again. And for the first time, Ethan realized the choice they'd made in the chamber wasn't the last. The crystal bridge thrummed like the string of some colossal instrument, the vibration rolling up through Ethan's legs and into his chest until it felt like his heartbeat had been replaced by the hum. The glow beneath their feet was blinding now, searing white shot through with shifting bands of blue and gold. Around them, the air warped as heat bled off the structure, blurring the shapes of the city beyond. Behind them, Verge warriors poured onto the bridge in a wave of chitin and pale light. Ahead, human soldiers in fleet armor pushed forward, weapons raised, their visors reflecting the bridge's unnatural glow. And somewhere in the maze of burning streets below, Arvenian fighters were moving toward this very point, the arcs of their long-range shots already cutting through the night sky. Ethan and Lyra were in the center of it all, and the voices, gods, the voices, were no longer taking turns. They spoke together now, one layered over the other, soft and cold, building and breaking, pulling at the same space in his mind until it felt like his skull might crack. The bridge stands if you bind her. The bridge falls if you end her. The bridge stands if you end her. The bridge falls if you bind her. The contradictions hit him in waves, each one stealing his balance for a heartbeat. His vision swam, the burning white of the crystal underfoot bleeding into everything. Lara gripped his arm hard enough to leave bruises, her own ears pressed flat against her skull. "It's in me too," she gasped. "Both of them. I can't tell which is—" "We don't have time to figure out which is lying," Ethan said. They were moving without realizing it, step by step toward the exact center of the bridge, where the glow was brightest. The crystal here was etched with the same arcs the shard had burned into the stone table. Only here they were massive, spanning the entire width of the bridge, each one humming with the rhythm of a heartbeat that was not their own. The first Verge warrior reached them. Ethan barely had time to twist, his rifle coming up in a smooth drilled motion. The blast caught it full in the chest, but instead of falling, it lunged forward, its weapon blooming into a hooked blade that scraped sparks from the crystal. Laura's sword was out in a heartbeat, the curved Arvenian steel catching the blow and throwing it wide. She pivoted, driving the point up under its arm in a move so fast Ethan barely saw it. The thing screamed, a high insectile keening, before sliding backward off her blade. More were coming. The humans reached shouting distance, their commander's voice cutting through the hum. "Stand down! The bridge is unstable!" Ethan wanted to laugh. Unstable didn't begin to cover it. A bolt of pale light from the Verge side took the commander in the throat. The humans broke into chaos, half returning fire toward the Verge, half still advancing toward Ethan and Lyra. Somewhere in the confusion, Ethan felt the hum change. The glow flared upward in a column, swallowing the sky above them. And then they weren't on the bridge anymore. Not exactly. The city was gone, replaced by an endless plain of white crystal under a sky that shifted between stars and nothing. The arcs stretched out in every direction, each one crossing another, forming an infinite lattice. Lara stood beside him, but the heat of her grip on his arm was the only proof she was real. Everything else felt weightless. The voices spoke again, and this time there was no softness, no coldness, only certainty. "This is the crossing. This is where bridges hold or break." Ethan looked around. In the distance, he could see shapes moving along the arcs. Some familiar, some alien, some so far beyond human form, his eyes refused to hold them. They were all moving toward the center, toward him. "What happens if we make the wrong choice?" he asked, though he wasn't sure who he was asking. The answer came in both voices, perfectly in sync. "There is no wrong choice. There is only the choice you carry." All returned to him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the reflected light, and there was something in them he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not defiance, but acceptance. If we bind, we fight for the bridge every day until we die. If we break, we burn everything down and walk away. And you? Ethan asked. She hesitated, ears twitching once. I think I'd rather build something worth dying for than survive something worth nothing. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even persuasion. It was just truth, offered and left for him to take or leave. The arcs under their feet brightened, the hum deepening until it felt like it was shaking his ribs apart. The shapes in the distance were closer now. He could see the gleam of weapons, the glint of eyes. Ethan thought of the shard, of the two arcs burned into the stone, unbroken. He thought of the terrace, the veil, the first time he'd seen her moving through the hollow trees like the forest itself was on her side. He thought of what it would mean to end that here. He reached out, closing his hand around hers. The glow surged, flooding upward through their bodies, out into the arc stretching into infinity. The hum became a single ringing note that seemed to cut through every faction's noise, every weapon's roar, every voice in his head, until there was nothing but light. When it faded, they were back on the bridge. The battle was frozen. Verge warriors stood still, weapons lowered. Human soldiers stared around them, confused. Above, the alien craft were drifting back, their jagged lines receding into the night. The arcs on the bridge still glowed faintly, the hum now a low, steady thrum like a heartbeat at rest. Lara exhaled slowly, her grip on his hand not loosening. It held. Ethan looked around at the stunned faces, at the empty air where enemies had stood a moment ago. For now, the bridge had chosen to stand, but every choice came with its own shadow. And somewhere out beyond the city, the fracture was still waiting.